There was a check on the table between us, $2 million, and a pen that neither of us had touched yet. Alina Cross sat across from me in the private dining room of a restaurant she owned a piece of, though she'd never once mentioned that to me in 2 years of marriage. She was wearing charcoal gray, the color of every important decision she'd ever made. Her hands were folded on the white tablecloth, steady, the way they always were in board meetings. Only her eyes gave her away. They kept moving to the check and away from it, like she couldn't decide if it was a peace offering or a confession. "You don't have to sign it tonight," she said. "I know I don't have to. Daniel, I'm going to sign it, Alina." She flinched at that, small, almost nothing. If I hadn't spent 2 years learning the difference between her nothing and her something, I would have missed it completely. "Here is what I want you to understand before I tell you how we got to this table. I did not marry Alina Cross for her money. I did not sign that check because I stopped loving her. I signed it because somewhere in the last 6 months, I had finally understood something that took me 34 years to learn. You cannot force a locked door open by loving it harder. So let me take you back. Back before the check. Back before the woman across from me became a stranger wearing my wife's face. Back to the beginning when a contract marriage was supposed to be nothing but paperwork, and somehow, impossibly, it became the realest thing I had ever felt. Chapter 1, 2 years earlier, I was 32 years old, drowning in my father's medical debt, and standing in the lobby of Cross Dynamics on the 61st floor of a building that made my modest apartment look like a shoebox. My name is Daniel Reyes. I was an architect, a good one, not a famous one, working for a firm that was quietly going under. My father had a stroke 8 months earlier. My mother had already spent her retirement savings. I had $200,000 of debt with my name attached to it and no realistic way to pay it down in my lifetime. Then my college friend Marcus, who worked in Cross Dynamics' legal department, called me with something he described as the strangest opportunity you'll ever get offered, and probably the only one that'll actually solve your problem. "Alina Cross needs a husband," he said. I remember laughing so hard I nearly dropped the phone. "I'm serious, Daniel. Her father's will has a clause. She inherits full controlling shares of the company only if she's married by her 35th birthday. She turns 35 in 4 months, so she wants to marry a stranger. She wants to marry someone who won't cause problems, someone private, someone who isn't going to sell the story to a tabloid or try to take half the company in 18 months. 2-year contract, full financial support during the marriage, a settlement at the end. She interviewed 6 men already. She hated all of them. Why would she hate me any less? Because you're not trying to impress her," Marcus said. "That's exactly the kind of person she needs." I told him no, 3 times. I told him I wasn't going to marry a woman I'd never met just because she needed a rubber stamp on her inheritance. Then I got the hospital bill for my father's 4th procedure, and I called Marcus back. The first time I saw Alina Cross in person, she was 20 minutes late, and she did not apologize for it. She walked into the small private meeting room like she owned the air in it because, in a sense, she did. Tall, dark hair pulled back so tightly it looked like it hurt. A blazer that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She sat down across from me, opened a folder, and looked at me the way you'd look at a resume. "Daniel Reyes, 32, architect. No criminal record, no significant debt in your name that isn't medical, no history with the press, no living siblings to complicate things, parents in Ohio." She looked up. "You understand this is a business transaction?" "I do. 2 years, we live together publicly, we attend events together, we are to everyone outside this room a married couple. Privately, you stay out of my business, I stay out of your life, and at the end of the 2 years we divorce quietly and you receive a settlement." "How much of a settlement?" She told me the number. I did the math on my father's debt in my head and understood in that moment that I was going to say yes regardless of anything else she said next. "Any questions?" she asked, already closing the folder. "One," I said. "Do you actually want to be married, or do you just need the paperwork?" She looked at me for a long moment. It was the first time I saw something flicker behind her eyes that wasn't calculation. "I need the paperwork," she said. "Wanting doesn't come into it." I should have believed her. I did believe her actually for a long time. I was wrong. Chapter 2. The wedding was small, fast, and about as romantic as a real estate closing. 12 guests, a courthouse judge, a photographer, Alina's PR team hired to make sure the photos looked convincingly warm. I remember she wore a simple ivory dress and stood exactly 2 feet away from me the entire ceremony, and when the judge told us to kiss, she turned her cheek instead of her lips. "For the cameras," she whispered. "Not for you." I moved into her penthouse on the Upper East Side that same week. It had floor-to-ceiling windows, more square footage than most houses I'd designed, and almost nothing personal in it. No photographs. No books left open on a side table. No plants that needed tending, because tending required someone to be present, and Alina was rarely present. She left before I woke up most mornings. She came home after 10 most nights, sometimes not until midnight, still in her heels, carrying a laptop bag that never seemed to leave her shoulder. The first few weeks, I tried to make conversation over the kitchen island. How was your day? Fine. Anything interesting happen? We closed the Hendrix acquisition. That's good, it's fine. I started to understand that fine was the wall Alina Cross put between herself and everyone who tried to get close. I stopped asking. I made my own dinner most nights, worked on my sketches at the kitchen table, and waited for the marriage that everyone believed was real to feel like anything other than living with a very polite, very expensive ghost. Marcus warned me it might be like this. She's not cold because she's cruel, he told me once over beers. She's cold because her father raised her to believe emotion was a liability in a boardroom. And her mother left when she was 9. Alina's entire life has been proving she doesn't need anyone. So how do you crack something like that? Marcus laughed into his glass. You don't, man. You just live next to it and hope it doesn't crack you first. The first real conversation Alina and I ever had happened by accident 3 weeks into the marriage at 2 in the morning. I couldn't sleep. I went to the kitchen for water and found her sitting on the floor by the window, still in her work clothes, an unopened bottle of wine beside her, staring out at the city like it owed her something. Can't sleep? I asked. I don't need company, Daniel. I didn't offer any. I need water. She almost smiled at that. Almost. I got my glass and instead of leaving I sat down against the wall a few feet from her, not close, not far. She didn't tell me to leave. My father died in this apartment, she said after a long silence. Right there, she nodded toward the study door. Heart attack. I found him at 7 in the morning because he didn't come out for his coffee. I didn't say I'm sorry. Something told me she'd heard that 1,000 times and it had never helped. That's a hard thing to walk past every day, I said instead. She looked at me then, really looked like I'd said something she hadn't expected. Most people say I'm sorry, she said. I figured you were tired of hearing it. I am, she pulled her knees up slightly. He used to tell me feelings were for people who could afford to lose. He built this company from nothing. He didn't have room for softness and he made sure I didn't either. Do you believe that you can't afford to lose? She was quiet for a long time. I don't know anymore, she said finally. Ask me in 2 years. She stood up, smoothed her skirt and walked to her bedroom without another word. But she left the wine bottle behind, unopened, like she decided she didn't need it after all. That was the night I stopped thinking of Alina Cross as an assignment and started thinking of her as a woman. Chapter 3, Marriages, even fake ones, develop rhythms. Ours did too. I learned she took her coffee black except on Sundays, when she allowed herself cream, like even that small comfort had to be rationed. I learned she hummed under her breath when she thought no one could hear her, always the same song, something her father used to play in the car. I learned that when she was truly stressed, she didn't yell, she went completely silent, and the silence was worse than any shouting I'd ever heard. She learned things about me too, even though she pretended not to notice. She started leaving my favorite coffee order with the barista downstairs without ever being asked. She noticed when I stopped sketching for a week and asked, carefully, like it cost her something, if I was doing all right. My father had taken a bad turn that week. I told her the truth, expecting her to nod and go back to her laptop. Instead, she sat down across from me at the kitchen table. Tell me about him, she said. Your father, so I did. I told her he used to take me to construction sites on Saturdays, how he'd point at half-finished buildings and ask me what I saw. I told her he cried at my college graduation even though he swore he wouldn't. I told her about the stroke, and the hospital bills, and how strange it was to watch a man who built houses with his hands forget how to hold a spoon for 2 weeks before the physical therapy started working again. Alina listened. She didn't interrupt, didn't offer empty comfort, didn't check her phone once. When I finished, she said something I didn't expect. That's why you took this deal. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. Yes, I thought it was the money. It is the money, but it's what the money's for that matters. She nodded slowly, like she was recalculating something in her head, recalculating me. My father would have respected that, she said quietly. He always said the measure of a man wasn't what he wanted, but what he was willing to sacrifice for the people he loved. Did he respect you? The question surprised her. I watched something cross her face, grief maybe, or old anger, or both tangled together. He respected what I built, she said. I'm not sure those are the same thing. She got up and refilled her coffee and the conversation ended there, but something had shifted. I felt it. A door that had been bolted shut had for just a moment come unlatched. Over the following months, the marriage stopped feeling like an arrangement and started feeling dangerously, quietly like a life. She started coming home earlier some nights. Not every night, but enough that I noticed. We developed a habit of eating together on Thursdays when her schedule allowed it, and those dinners slowly stretched from 20 silent minutes to an hour of actual conversation. I discovered she was funnier than anyone gave her credit for, a dry, surgical wit that only came out when she felt safe enough to use it. Once, after a brutal week of board meetings, she came home, kicked off her heels at the door and said, "I fired a man today for using the phrase synergistic alignment 3 times in one sentence. That seems harsh. He deserved it. Nobody should have to live like that." I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my water, and she looked almost proud of herself. There were other moments too, quieter ones. The night a summer storm knocked out power in half of Manhattan, and we sat on the floor of the living room with candles. And she told me, half laughing at herself, about the time she tried to bake a cake for her 12th birthday because no one else was going to, and burned it so badly the smoke alarm brought the doorman up to the penthouse. "Who ended up making you a cake?" I asked. "No one," she said. "I ate the burnt one anyway, out of spite." I remember looking at her in the candlelight and feeling something shift dangerously in my chest, not pity, not obligation, but something warmer and far more complicated. I remember thinking, this is not what I signed up for and I don't want to stop. There was a night 4 months into the marriage at a company gala, when a business rival named Victor Holloway cornered her near the bar and made a comment, low enough that he thought I couldn't hear it, about how impressive it was that she'd finally found someone to manage her. I watched Alina's spine straighten. Watched her prepare the perfectly polished response she probably used 100 times a year. "I got there first." "Actually," I said, sliding an arm loosely around her waist, smiling the way you smile at someone you find genuinely amusing, "she manages me. I just get to enjoy the view." Victor laughed awkwardly and excused himself. Alina looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen from her before, not gratitude exactly, something closer to surprise that someone had stood beside her without being asked to. "You didn't have to do that," she said once he was gone. "I know. Why did you? Because nobody talks to my wife like that." I hadn't meant to say wife like I meant it. But I did mean it, and from the way her breath caught just slightly, I think she noticed. That night in the car home, she fell asleep against the window, and when we got to the building, she let me guide her inside with a hand at her back, not pulling away like she usually would have. I told myself it didn't mean anything. I was already lying to myself by then. Chapter 4. By the 8th month, I knew the truth, even if I hadn't said it out loud yet, even to myself. I was in love with my wife. Not the version of her the tabloids wrote about, the ice queen, cold and untouchable, a woman who supposedly ate ambition for breakfast. I was in love with the version only I seemed to get to see. The woman who hummed her father's song while making coffee, who kept a photo of her mother hidden in a drawer she thought I didn't know about, who once spent 40 minutes helping me talk through a building design over red wine, asking sharp, genuinely curious questions that had nothing to do with being polite. I told Marcus over lunch one day, half joking, half terrified. He put down his sandwich and stared at me. "You know this ends in 18 months, he said. "Contract's a contract. I know you're going to get hurt. I know that too. Does she feel anything back?" That was the question I couldn't answer. There were nights I was almost certain. The way she'd lean into me on the couch during a movie, not quite by accident. The way she'd started texting me small, unnecessary updates throughout her day. A sunset from her office window, a ridiculous meme, nothing important except that it was. The way she looked at me sometimes like she was trying to memorize something before it disappeared. And there were other nights when the walls came back up so completely, I barely recognized her, clipped answers, locked office door. A coldness that felt less like her natural state, and more like armor she was putting back on in a hurry. I decided to test the water. On our first anniversary, an anniversary that meant nothing on paper since our contract was purely business, I planned something small. I didn't tell her. I just came home early, cooked the only dish I actually knew how to make well. A lemon chicken recipe from my mother. Set the table with candles I bought from a bodega because I didn't know where else to find them, and waited. She came home at 8, saw the table and stopped in the doorway. "What is this?" "It's been a year," I said. "I know it's not real to you, but it felt real enough to me that I wanted to mark it." She stood very still for a long moment. I watched something war behind her eyes, the businesswoman calculating risk, and underneath her, someone younger and far less armored, wanting badly to just sit down at the table. The second version won, that night. She sat down. She ate the chicken and told me genuinely that it was better than anything her private chef had ever made her, which I suspected was a lie but appreciated anyway. Halfway through the meal, she reached across the table and put her hand over mine. "Daniel," she said, quiet, careful, like she was stepping onto ice she wasn't sure would hold her. "I need you to know something." "What?" "I didn't expect this," she said. "Any of it. I thought I was buying a business partner. I didn't think," she stopped, exhaled. "I didn't think I'd start looking forward to Thursdays." My heart was doing something violent in my chest. "Alina, don't," she said, gently pulling her hand back, not far, just enough. "Don't say anything yet. I'm not ready to hear it out loud, but I wanted you to know that you're not the only one who feels something real in this house. It wasn't a declaration of love, it wasn't even close. But it was the most honest thing she'd said to me in a year, and I went to bed that night believing, foolishly, wonderfully, that the ice was finally starting to melt for good. I had no idea how wrong that hope would turn out to be, not because she didn't feel it, but because of what was about to happen to both of us in the months that followed. Chapter 5. The change started so small I almost missed it. It began around month 14, roughly 2 months after our anniversary dinner. Alina started working later again, not unusual on its own, except that her schedule had been steadier for months before that. She started taking calls in the study with the door closed, something she'd stopped doing around me since the storm night. Her phone, which used to sit face up on the kitchen counter, started staying face down, always within reach. I told myself it was work, a new acquisition, maybe, or a difficult board fight. Alina's company was mid-negotiation on a merger with a European firm that had been eating up her time and patience for weeks. I knew that much was true, because she mentioned it briefly in the same clipped tone she used for everything that stressed her. But there were other things that work didn't explain. She started dressing differently on the nights she said she had dinner meetings, not more formal, but more deliberate somehow, a specific shade of red lipstick she never wore to actual board dinners, perfume she didn't usually bother with for work events. Small things, the kind of things you notice but talk yourself out of noticing because the alternative is too painful to sit with. One night in March she came home at nearly midnight and I was still awake, working on a sketch at the kitchen table. She smelled faintly of a cologne that wasn't hers, wasn't mine, wasn't anything I recognized from her usual perfume rotation. She saw me notice, I know she did, because her expression flickered and she said too quickly, cigar bar. The whole place reeked, sorry, I should shower. I didn't ask why she'd been at a cigar bar for a business dinner. I told myself it was normal, deals happened in strange places, powerful men still smoked cigars and made decisions behind closed doors, and Alina had spent her whole career playing in rooms like that. But the excuse sat wrong in my stomach, the way a lie does even when you can't prove it's a lie yet. A week later, her assistant, Priya, a sharp, kind woman who had worked for Alina since the company's early days and who I'd grown to genuinely like over the past year, stopped me in the lobby of the building unexpectedly. Daniel, she said, glancing around like she wasn't sure she should be talking to me at all. Can I ask you something? Of course. Has Alina mentioned anything about James Whitfield to you? The name meant nothing to me. Who's that? Priya hesitated and I watched her decide in real time not to say whatever she'd almost said. No one, forget I asked, probably nothing. But it wasn't nothing, I could see it in her face. And the name stayed lodged in my chest like a splinter for days. I found out who James Whitfield was 3 weeks later, and it broke something in me that has never fully healed, even now. Chapter 6. I wasn't looking for proof. I want to be honest about that because it matters. I wasn't the kind of husband who checked phones or followed cars. I trusted Alina, even with all the suspicion sitting quietly in my chest because I loved her, and loving someone means choosing to believe them until the evidence makes belief impossible. The evidence came on a Tuesday. I'd gone to Cross Dynamics to bring Alina lunch, something I did occasionally, a small, ordinary act of love that had become one of our unspoken rituals. Priya wasn't at her desk. The office assistant covering for her told me Alina was in a meeting in the executive conference room and would be a few more minutes. So I sat in the waiting area outside. Through the frosted glass, I could see 2 shapes, Alina and a tall man I didn't recognize. I couldn't hear words, only tone, and the tone was wrong, too soft, too familiar. Not the clipped, efficient cadence Alina used with vendors or board members. This was different, warmer. And then I saw the shapes move closer together, saw the taller shape reach out and touch her arm, saw her not step back. I didn't go in. I told myself I was wrong about what I was seeing, that shadows through frosted glass could mean anything, that I was building a story out of nothing because Priya had planted a seed of doubt in me weeks earlier. I left the lunch with the receptionist and walked out of the building like my legs belonged to someone else. That night, Alina came home and mentioned, casually, that she'd had a productive meeting with James Whitfield, their new consultant on the European merger. She said his name the way you say the name of someone who means nothing to you. She was very good at that. I've since learned she was very good at a lot of things I never suspected. I should have confronted her that night. I didn't. I told myself I needed real proof before I accused my wife, the woman I loved, of something so devastating. I told myself I owed her the benefit of the doubt, after everything we'd built. The real proof came 2 weeks later, and it came in the cruelest way possible. I'd gone to pick up dry cleaning near her office and decided, on a whim, to surprise her with coffee before her last meeting of the day. I took the elevator to the 61st floor, and as the doors opened, I saw them in the private hallway that led to the executive elevator bank. A hallway with cameras, presumably, though clearly Alina had stopped caring about being careful. James Whitfield had his hand at the small of her back. She wasn't pulling away. And as I stood frozen at the elevator doors, I watched him lean down and kiss her, not a peck, not an accident, a real kiss, the kind that comes from familiarity, from repetition, from something that had clearly been happening for longer than a few weeks. I don't remember pressing the button to close the elevator doors. I don't remember the ride down 61 floors. I remember standing on the sidewalk outside Cross Dynamics with a coffee cup in my hand that I never delivered, watching the building like it might collapse, feeling something collapse inside my own chest instead. I want to tell you I confronted her right there. I didn't. I went home, sat at the kitchen table where I'd once cooked her lemon chicken, and waited for her to walk through the door and tell me the truth on her own, because some foolish, hopeful part of me still believed she owed that much to what we'd built. She didn't tell me. She came home at 9, kissed my cheek like nothing had happened, and asked what I wanted for dinner. That was the night I understood fully and completely that the woman I loved had been living 2 lives, and I had only ever been allowed into one of them. Chapter 7, I waited 3 more days before I said anything. Not because I was afraid of her. Because I needed to be sure I wasn't going to say something I couldn't take back, something born purely out of rage instead of the truth I actually deserved. On the 4th night she came home late again, that same cologne clinging faintly to her coat. I was sitting in the living room, lights off except for the city glow through the windows, a glass of whiskey I hadn't touched sitting on the table in front of me. "You're up late," she said, setting her bag down. "How long?" I asked. She went still. "How long what? How long have you been seeing him, James Whitfield?" The silence that followed felt like it lasted an hour. I watched her face cycle through denial, calculation, and finally something that looked almost like relief. The exhausted relief of someone who has been carrying a lie so heavy they were grateful, in some sick way, to finally put it down. "Daniel, don't," I said. "Don't say my name like that, just answer the question." She sat down slowly in the armchair across from me, hands folded the way they always were when she needed to look composed and steady, even when nothing inside her was. 6 months, she said quietly. 6 months. 4 months after our anniversary dinner. 4 months after she told me I wasn't the only one who felt something real in this house. Was any of it real? My voice cracked, and I hated myself for it. The anniversary, the storm, the gala, was any single part of that real, or was I just convenient? A stamp on a piece of paper that let you keep your father's company. "It was real," she said, and for the first time in the whole conversation her voice shook too. "That's what makes this so complicated, Daniel. It was real, and then things with the merger got difficult and James understood the business in a way that—" "Don't," I said again, sharper this time. "Don't tell me he understood you better. Don't tell me it was about the business. I watched him kiss you in a hallway with cameras, Alina. That's not confusion, that's not stress. That's a choice you made over and over for 6 months while I was home cooking dinner for a woman who wasn't fully mine to love." She flinched like I'd struck her. "Maybe in a way I had. I never meant to fall in love with you," she said, and it came out almost like an accusation, like it was somehow my fault for loving her honestly while she loved me carelessly. "This was supposed to be a contract. A transaction. I built walls for a reason, Daniel, and you kept climbing over them, and I didn't know how to stop you, and I didn't know how to trust that it would last, so somewhere along the way I started keeping one foot outside the marriage. Just in case." "In case of what?" "In case you left," she said, and her composure finally broke, tears sliding down a face that almost never allowed them. "In case 2 years ended and you took the settlement and disappeared, and I was left here again alone the way I've always ended up alone. James was insurance, something that wouldn't hurt as much to lose." I stood up. I remember my hands were shaking. "You think I would have left?" I said. "Alina, I fell in love with you for free. You didn't have to pay me $2 million to make me stay. I would have stayed for nothing. And instead of trusting that, you built yourself an exit before I ever gave you a reason to need one." She had no answer for that, because there wasn't one. I slept in the guest room that night. I didn't sleep at all, actually. I lay there listening to her cry quietly through the wall, and some small, foolish part of me wanted to go comfort her, and a larger, wiser part of me finally, painfully, refused to move. Chapter 8, the weeks that followed were the coldest of our entire marriage, colder than the beginning when we were strangers who owed each other nothing. Now we were 2 people who had once owed each other everything, and had both, in different ways, failed to protect it. Alina tried in her own limited way to fix things. She ended things with James. She told me this plainly, without excuses, a week after the confrontation. She started coming home earlier again. She left small, careful gestures around the apartment, the way she used to before the affair began: my coffee order, a book she thought I'd like. A quiet apology disguised as a gesture because she still, even now, struggled to say the actual words. But something in me had gone quiet in a way I didn't know how to undo. I kept thinking about Priya's warning in the lobby, about the cologne, about the hallway with the cameras. I kept thinking about how easily she had lied to my face. kissed my cheek, asked about dinner, on a night when I already knew the truth and she still hadn't told me. Trust, I learned, is not a wall you can rebuild simply because the person on the other side wants it rebuilt. Sometimes the wall stays down even after the danger has passed, because the fear of it happening again lives in your body long after your mind has forgiven the person who broke it. 2 months after the confrontation, Alina called a meeting not at home, at a restaurant, formal, the way she handled things she couldn't bear to feel casually. She brought the settlement paperwork with her. "I'm not going to fight you on this," she said, sliding the folder across the table. "The 2-year contract is almost up anyway. I know things aren't, I know we're not what we were. I think it's time we talk about how this ends." I looked at the check clipped to the front of the folder. $2 million, the exact number from our original agreement, untouched, unchanged, like none of the last 18 months had happened at all. "You're just going to hand me a check," I said, "like this was always just business." "It's not like that," her voice cracked slightly. "It's the only language I know how to speak when I don't know what else to do. I don't know how to fix what I broke, Daniel. I don't know how to ask you to stay without sounding like I'm trying to buy you into forgiving me. So I'm giving you what was always yours according to the contract, and I'm letting you decide what you want to do with the rest." I sat with that for a long moment. Some part of me, a tired, hurting, still loving part, wanted to reach across the table and tell her that no amount of money would ever have been the reason I stayed, and that the fact she still thought in numbers, even now, even after everything, told me more about the distance between us than any affair ever could. "I'll sign it," I said finally. Her face went pale. "Daniel, not because of the money," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm signing it because I finally understand something. I spent 2 years trying to prove to you that I was safe to love. And you spent those same 2 years half convinced I'd eventually leave, so you made sure you'd survive it if I did. I can't keep loving someone who's preparing for my absence instead of trusting my presence. That's not a marriage, Alina. That's just 2 people taking turns getting hurt." She didn't argue. I think somewhere underneath the shock she already knew I was right. I signed the papers 3 days later at that same table where this story began. $2 million. The end of a marriage that had started as a business deal and somehow, impossibly, became the realest thing I'd ever felt right up until it wasn't. I want you to notice something, because I didn't fully understand it myself until much later. I didn't take that money because I stopped loving her. I took it because loving her the way I had, fully, honestly, without an exit plan, had nearly destroyed me. And I needed to remember what it felt like to build a life that didn't depend on someone else finally deciding I was safe enough to trust. I walked out of that restaurant believing I had lost the only woman I would ever love that completely. I had no idea that Alina Cross was about to learn exactly what she'd lost too, and that the lesson would nearly break her. Chapter 9. Alina didn't cry when I left, not in front of me. I only learned what happened after, months later, through Priya, who eventually told me things Alina herself was too proud to admit. The first week, Priya said, Alina worked 18-hour days, the way she always had before the marriage, throwing herself into the merger with a ferocity that frightened even her most seasoned executives. She told herself she was fine. She told everyone she was fine. The Ice Queen back in full form, colder and sharper than ever. But the penthouse told a different story. She kept finding things of mine she hadn't packed up. A coffee mug I always used, tucked in the back of a cabinet. A sketch I'd left half-finished on the kitchen table, one I'd forgotten about entirely, a rough plan for a community housing project I'd been dreaming about for years. She found herself more than once, standing in the doorway of the guest room where I'd slept those last 2 months, staring at the neatly made bed like it might explain something to her. She stopped humming her father's song, Priya said, because she couldn't do it anymore without thinking of the mornings I used to catch her doing it and smile without saying anything, letting her have the moment instead of interrupting it. 3 weeks after I left, she went looking for the burnt cake story. She actually asked Priya out of nowhere if she remembered where the old family photo albums were, because she wanted to find a picture of her 12th birthday. Priya said she'd never seen Alina ask for something so small and so strange in the 15 years she'd worked for her. "I think," Priya told her gently, "you're looking for someone to tell that story to again." Alina didn't answer her. But she didn't deny it either. A month in, she called James Whitfield not out of longing but curiosity, almost like she needed to understand what she'd actually lost him for. Priya said the call lasted 4 minutes. Alina hung up and told Priya flatly, "I don't even remember why I thought that meant something." Whatever safety net she'd built with James had never been real. It had been fear wearing the costume of connection. 2 months in, she started asking Marcus carefully, indirectly, in a way she probably thought was subtle, how I was doing. Marcus, loyal to me first, gave her almost nothing. "He's fine," he'd say. "He's figuring things out." It wasn't a lie. It also wasn't the whole truth because Marcus wasn't going to hand Alina a road map back into my life until he was certain I actually wanted her to have one. By the third month, according to Priya, Alina had started going to therapy, quietly, privately, telling no one at the company, terrified someone would use it against her. She'd never done that before. Her father raised her to believe therapists were for people who could afford weakness. Alina Cross had never once, in 35 years, believed she could afford weakness. She was starting to learn that she could. Chapter 10. While Alina was learning how to feel things she'd spent a lifetime avoiding, I was doing something entirely different. I was building a life. I used the $2 million the way I'd always intended to. I paid off my father's medical debt completely, set my parents up with enough security that they'd never worry about a hospital bill again, and put the remainder into starting my own small architecture firm. Something I dreamed about since I was a kid, pointing at half-finished buildings with my father. The work saved me, honestly, in ways I didn't expect. I threw myself into design the way Alina had thrown herself into her company, except mine didn't come from fear. It came from finally having room to build something that was entirely, completely mine. I moved into a small apartment in Brooklyn, nothing like the penthouse, and somehow it felt more like home than that apartment ever had. I started running again, something I hadn't done consistently in years. I reconnected with friends I'd let drift during the marriage. People who didn't know the details of what had happened and didn't need to, they just knew I needed company, and they gave it freely. I won't pretend it was easy. There were nights the ache of losing her sat in my chest like a stone I couldn't move. There were mornings I reached for my phone to send her something small and unimportant, a sunset, a joke, the kind of thing we used to trade without thinking, before remembering all over again that I didn't get to do that anymore. But slowly, month by month, something in me started to heal in a way that had nothing to do with forgetting her, and everything to do with becoming someone who no longer needed her forgiveness or her return to feel whole. 6 months after the divorce, my small firm landed its first major project, a mixed-income housing development in Queens, the kind of work I'd always wanted to do, work that meant something beyond a paycheck. I stood at the groundbreaking ceremony, my father beside me in a wheelchair, fully recovered enough to attend, my mother crying happy tears for the first time in years, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. I felt proud of the man I'd become, entirely independent of whether Alina Cross ever came back into my life at all. That, I would later realize, was exactly the version of me she eventually found. Chapter 11. It was Priya who finally told Alina the truth, 7 months after the divorce, in a conversation Alina later described to me as the hardest 10 minutes of her professional life. Alina had asked Priya once again indirectly how I was doing. Priya, who had watched Alina unravel quietly for months, who had watched her boss become someone more human and more lost in equal measure, finally decided enough was enough. "Can I say something you're not going to like?" Priya asked. Alina nodded. "You keep asking about him like you're waiting for permission to want him back. You don't need my permission, Alina. You need to actually decide if you're willing to become someone he can trust again, because from what Marcus tells me, Daniel isn't sitting around waiting for you. He's building a life. A good one. With or without you in it." Alina, according to Priya, sat in silence for a long time after that. "I didn't lose a husband," she finally said, so quietly Priya almost didn't hear it. "I lost the only person who ever wanted me and not what I could give him. James wanted access. The men before Daniel wanted the company. Daniel wanted to fix a piece of art in the kitchen because he thought it was crooked, and it bothered him more than anything I could have offered him financially. I had that, and I let fear convince me it wasn't safe to keep. So what are you going to do about it?" Priya asked. "I don't know yet," Alina admitted. "But I know sending flowers and a card isn't going to fix 2 years of proving to him I couldn't be trusted." She was right about that, and to her credit, she didn't try the easy way. Alina spent the next month doing something none of us expected from the ice queen of cross dynamics. She went to therapy twice a week instead of once. She sat down, alone, and wrote out by hand, Priya said, not typed, not delegated, every specific way she had failed me during the marriage. Not vague apologies, specific moments, the cologne she thought I hadn't noticed, the lie about the cigar bar, the night she came home and asked about dinner instead of telling me the truth she already knew I deserved. She didn't show up at my apartment, she didn't call. She understood, finally, painfully, that trust wasn't something you could demand back through grand gestures or desperate declarations. She understood that if she wanted any chance of being let back into my life, she had to first become someone worth letting back in, regardless of whether I ever gave her that chance at all. She started quietly funding scholarships for kids from single-parent households, something she never told the press about, something Priya only found out about by accident while processing paperwork. When Priya asked her why, Alina said simply, "Because someone should have room to be soft and still succeed. I never had that, maybe someone else can." She was becoming someone her father might not have recognized, and someone I would later realize, far more real than the Ice Queen the world had spent years writing headlines about. Chapter 12. I saw her again 9 months after I signed the divorce papers, at the groundbreaking of my firm's second major project. A community center in the Bronx that I designed pro bono. A project that had gotten some local press coverage in the weeks leading up to it. I didn't know she'd be there. I found out later that Priya had mentioned it to her, almost as a test, to see what Alina would actually do with the information. She came alone. No security detail trailing behind her, no publicist orchestrating a photo opportunity. She stood at the edge of the small crowd in a simple coat, nothing like the armor of blazers and heels I remembered, and when our eyes met across the lot, I felt something in my chest lock up entirely. I finished the ceremony. I shook hands, answered questions from a local reporter, thanked the city council members who'd shown up. And the entire time, I was aware of exactly where she was standing, like she'd become a landmark I couldn't stop navigating around. When the crowd finally thinned, she approached me carefully, the way you approach something you're not sure will let you get close. "This is beautiful, Daniel," she said, gesturing at the site behind me. "Really beautiful, thank you," my voice came out steadier than I expected. "I didn't come to interrupt your day," she said quickly. "I saw the article, I wanted to see it in person." "I'll go," she turned to leave, and something in me, some old instinct I hadn't fully let go of, made me speak before I could think better of it. "You don't have to go." She stopped, turned back slowly. "I've been in therapy," she said, like she needed to say it before she lost her nerve. "For 7 months. I've been trying to understand why I did what I did, not to excuse it, just to understand it, so I never do it again to anyone, whether that's you or someone else entirely. I know I don't deserve to just walk back into your life because I finally figured some things out, but I wanted you to know that I did the work. Not for you, for me. Because I finally understood what my father's lesson actually cost me, and I don't want to keep paying that price for the rest of my life." I didn't say anything for a long moment. The old ache in my chest was there, familiar, sharp. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because you deserve to know that I finally understand what I lost," she said. "You never wanted my company or my money. You wanted me, all of me, even the parts I was ashamed of. And I threw that away because I was too afraid to believe someone could actually stay. I'm not asking you to forgive me, Daniel. I don't think I've earned that yet. I just needed you to know the truth, even if it doesn't change anything between us." I stood there in the cold Bronx afternoon, looking at a woman who had once been the coldest, most guarded person I'd ever loved, now standing in front of me with nothing to hide behind, no title, no security team, no calculated composure. "Just Alina, I'm not the same man who signed that check," I said finally. "I know," she said. "I don't want that man back. I want to know the man standing in front of me now if he's willing to let me try." Chapter 13. I want to be honest with you about what happened next, because I think it matters more than any fairy tale version of this story could. I didn't forgive her that day. I told her plainly that I needed time, real time, not a symbolic gesture followed by an immediate reunion. She nodded, and to her credit, she didn't push. She gave me her number, the same number I deleted 8 months earlier, and told me simply, "Whenever you're ready." If you're never ready, I understand that too. But I needed you to know. Over the following weeks, she didn't call. She didn't text unprompted. She let me set the entire pace, which was, I realized later, exactly the kind of restraint the old Alina never would have been capable of. The old Alina controlled everything. This version of her had learned painfully how to wait. I called her 3 weeks later. Not because I'd forgiven her, I hadn't, not fully, not yet, but because I found myself curious about who she'd become, and curiosity, I've learned, is often where real healing begins. We met for coffee, not dinner, nothing that carried the weight of romance yet. We talked for 2 hours about nothing important and everything important at once: my firm, her scholarship program, her therapy, my parents, the community center. It felt for the first time since the divorce like talking to a person instead of navigating a wound. That became a pattern: coffee every couple of weeks. Then dinner. Then slowly, over nearly a year, something that looked almost like courtship. Except this time there was no contract, no settlement waiting at the end, no clause forcing either of us to stay. Just two people choosing each other, one honest conversation at a time. I asked her eventually the question that had haunted me the longest. "If I hadn't found out about James," I said one evening, "would you have ever told me the truth?" She was quiet for a long time. I respected her enough by then to wait for the real answer instead of the easy one. "I don't know," she admitted. "I want to tell you I would have, but I think, honestly, fear might have kept me silent longer than either of us would have wanted. That's the ugliest part of what I've had to face in therapy, understanding that I might have let you keep loving someone half-honest, just because the alternative terrified me more. It hurt to hear. But I respected the honesty more than I would have respected a comforting lie. That's the difference between us now, I told her. I need honesty even when it hurts more than I need comfort that isn't true. I know, she said. I finally understand that too. It's been 2 years since that groundbreaking ceremony in the Bronx. Alina and I aren't married again, not yet, though we've talked about it, carefully, without urgency, the way two people talk about a future they actually trust will hold. She still runs Cross Dynamics, though she's different now. The board noticed it before the tabloids did. A woman who still commands every room she enters, but who has learned to lead without the armor that once made her untouchable. She still funds those scholarships. And last year, for the first time, she let a reporter write about them. Not for the publicity, but because she said other people deserved to know that softness and success weren't opposites after all. I still run my firm. We finished the community center. We're breaking ground on our third project next spring. My father, fully recovered, still shows up to every groundbreaking in his wheelchair, telling anyone who'll listen that his son builds things that matter, and I've never been prouder to hear him say it. Alina and I have dinner most Thursdays now, the same tradition we started years ago, except this time neither of us is performing for anyone. Last week, she hummed her father's song while making coffee, and when she caught me smiling at her, she didn't stop. She just smiled back and kept humming, unguarded, unafraid, in a way the old Alina never could have allowed herself to be. Sometimes she still asks me quietly, almost like she needs to hear it, why I gave her a second chance after everything that happened. I tell her the truth every time because the truth is the only thing either of us can afford now. Because love isn't about never breaking something, I say. It's about whether you're willing to become someone worthy of rebuilding it. You did that slowly, honestly, without expecting me to hand it to you for free. That's the only kind of second chance worth taking. The $2 million is long gone, most of it built into buildings that now house families who needed somewhere safe to land. I like to think there's something fitting about that. The money that was supposed to mark the end of us instead became the thing that let me build a life strong enough to eventually welcome her back into it, on terms that were finally, truly honest. I didn't take that check because I stopped loving Alina Cross. I took it because I finally understood that love, real love, has to survive on its own terms. Not fear, not contracts, not money, not the desperate hope that staying would eventually be enough to earn something someone wasn't ready to give. She had to lose me completely to understand what she'd actually had. And I had to walk away with nothing but $2 million and a broken heart to finally become the kind of man worth coming back to. The end.